We are live. We're just waiting for to see if we get anybody today or whether everybody's back at the office going absolutely crazy. I mean, I've heard, I had clients yesterday phoning me up or sending messages. It's like chaos. I had one of my clients this morning at 9:15 to say it's just gone absolutely crazy. Getting loads of calls and calls and calls, so it's mad. So actually we're up to 4 people viewing. So firstly, thank you for joining us. Can you just comment whether you can hear us? Hi James Jury, nice to see you. Thanks for coming on. So can you just put yes in the comments that you can hear us loud and clear, and please can you like it, share it, get the message out, and I will introduce you. So first of all, can you hear us? That's the most important thing. Okay, or we're just going to talk amongst ourselves. Thanks Brendan, nice to hear. So we've got Brendan again joining us from Whitney, so thank you again. So we're just having a conversation, Chris and I, about what's gone on in the last 24 hours, the shock of having to go back to work for a lot of people. So hi Kimberly, thanks for joining again. Thanks James for saying you can hear us. Hi Andrea, sunny in Perth again today, so Scotland's still in lockdown. So I know I was speaking to an agent actually in the last half an hour who's in Wales as well, and they're waiting to hear. So actually, Andrea, hi Owen, friend of yours, Owen's on here. Remember him?
Yeah, I remember him.
Hi Piers, thanks for joining us again. So please like it, please share it, please get the message out to everybody. So Chris, we're going to get going. So thanks very much for joining us today. Delighted to be joined by Chris Baker from McDowell Surveyors in East London, whose firm has been going since 1880. You look amazing, you really do. I know, no great hair as well. It's absolutely incredible.
Oh, yeah. The camera's well concealed. It's fine.
Hi Simon, thanks for joining us. Hi Sarah again. I think you're stalking me, following me on the Brief Your Market webinar yesterday and now coming on to this. Very grateful, so thanks very much. So please like it, share it, get your colleagues involved as well. Hi Ruth again, thanks for joining us. And again, if you're watching this after, welcome as well. And thanks for joining us for the replay as well. So Chris, as you can imagine, I've got quite a few questions for you. First question, what are the best way to avoid getting down valuations? Our surveyor's going to be playing it safe with everything that's going on as well, and all the uncertainty. Obviously people's circumstances have changed. Before they may have agreed a sale, they now sadly may be made redundant, they may be furloughed, they're not sure what's going to go back to work. What's your take on it, please?
I think what we're likely to see is more caution in the market generally. So as surveyors, we tend to look at comparable evidence when we go out and value any particular property. What we're going to find as valuers is that during lockdown for the last 8 weeks, there's been very little activity. And the fact that the land registry data usually lags the market by a couple of months as well isn't really going to help us. So we're going to go through a period where I think that our instructions by lenders are going to be that we're going to need to consider a longer period of comparable evidence when we look at our valuations. So whilst the market was picking up in January, February time, then we hit lockdown and everything came to a grinding halt. So I'm expecting that comparable evidence during January and February is going to be very important going forward. Before Christmas, we then had the election. Prior to that, we were worried about Brexit. So it's been a very tricky 18 months really in the market. But the number of transactions is definitely going to be one of the key difficulties for valuers. As such, I'd expect there to be a difficult period for the next couple of months until the data starts pulling through as to what evidence has actually happened during March, April. But I think it's going to be key that your valuers are naturally going to be a little cautious, and perhaps more so than usual. So I think you're going to find that there will be some down values that occur off the back of the lack of comparable information.
Now, being a chartered surveyor myself, not that I use it much, when I was an agent, going back to my agency days, sadly, I haven't been through anything like COVID-19, but obviously we've been through other crises as well. And I used to have nice discussions with surveyors when they downvalued it, and had the discussion to say, look, if I was able to find you comparables that were to help you, would you reconsider your valuation that you've given to the lender?
Yeah.
Do you think people will be amenable to that now? I mean, from my point of view, I know some surveyors with their pride, no, I'm not, I've given it, that's my figure, that's it, full stop.
I think it would be sensible for common sense to apply. So I think that if an agent is able to provide comparable evidence, and it's genuinely comparable and it has genuinely completed, and they can evidence that even if it hasn't gone onto the land registry database as yet, then I think providing that, the surveyor should be taking that into consideration. I think that's one of the keys really, in a way, estate agents and surveyors in difficult times should be acting together in order to try and move things forward. I think sometimes we become adversaries rather than working together and trying to cooperate. I think when the surveyor walks into the agency office, sometimes we find that it's a little bit frosty. We're going to downvalue, we're going to do this, we're going to do that. But if you could go in there with a smile on your face and say, right, here's some evidence of what we've sold that is similar within the last few months that might not be on land registry yet, then I think the surveyor should be taking that into account. We can, as long as we can verify it and it's good information, then I think it should be used and should apply.
Okay, so again, a couple of other people join. Hi, Ashley. Thanks for joining again. Chris, who's watching from his office today, so obviously already back at work on his lunchtime learning. So thanks very much, Chris. Appreciate it. So please, if you can share it, if you can like it, get your colleagues involved. That'd be appreciated. So you talk about, here's what I found interesting going back to my time as an agent. How prepared do you find agents are for surveyors when they come into the office? Is it like a last minute, right, let's go and find the keys? Or do you find a lot of agents are actually really prepared? They've got the details ready for you. They've got the comparables ready for you. They've got the keys ready for you. They've got the tenant's name and number in case there's a tenant there as well to make it easy for you. How good are people? How helpful are agents?
I've come across some really helpful ones. I'll give you an example. Recently, I had my car break down outside an agent's office over in Teddington. AA came out, took my car away, and the agent kindly ran me round to the property, waited for me to do the inspection, dropped me back to the station. So you get some that are amazing. You do get some that are literally, right, here's a set of keys, sign here, off you go, don't talk to me, don't really do anything at all. I think going forward, it needs to be more, to avoid that down valuation, it needs to be more cooperation between the two of us. So if we go in and say, look, have you sold anything recently that's similar? Are the keys available? Is there a tenant in the property, and so on? I think we're going to have to be more cautious about how we intend to visit these properties. We, as surveyors, are going to need to wear PPE and so on. I think the people we're going to see need to be aware to expect us to be a bit uncomfortable at the moment, really, because I think going in and out of people's homes at the moment is still something that we need to consider carefully.
Do you think people will, or lenders will, accept more desktop valuations now, or do you think people were still, or the lenders will still want you to physically go inside? I suppose there's, potentially there's three different types of, you've got a mortgage valuation, obviously, you've got a home buyers report, you've got the full structural report, and in Scotland you've got the home report as well. So, if I was a lender, do you think they would be happy just if it's a mortgage valuation, just a drive-by or a desktop?
We've seen that over the last few months, that more mortgage providers are certainly happier with a desktop valuation, or have increased their reliability on an automated valuation model. So we have seen that, but I think given the uncertainty, an automated algorithm is exactly that. It doesn't necessarily take into account, it's only as good as the information that's put into it. And I think, touching on what I said earlier, I think the information put into it at the moment is going to be quite sketchy, and certainly below what we would expect to see in terms of evidence. I expect mortgages where it's a high loan to value that we're still going to be asked to attend site. With lower loan to values, I can imagine that they would be happier with a desktop approach. If all fails, then I think an automated valuation model is something that's continued to get increasing reliance across the banks and mortgage providers. And during difficult times, it's something that can help, but I don't think I don't think it should be the sole answer. I think wherever possible, surveyors should go to site to confirm the property is good security for the loan. And I think that gives comfort as well to both the buyer, the seller, and the mortgage company often.
Okay, lovely. So Andrea from Scotland has said purple bricks have listed properties in Scotland with home reports done during lockdown by a company called the Home Report Company, which are not listed on the lenders panel. So basically their report is useless if a buyer needs a mortgage. How can a company sell such a poor service to a vendor? And Rick has joined us to say, happy Thursday all, nice and cheery. So thank you. So just coming back to the different types of survey, mortgage valuation, hopefully that's says what it does on the tin.
Yeah, absolutely.
Home buyer structural surveys, should us agents be advising people to, have full surveys, full structural surveys, home buyers reports, what's the difference between the three, please?
Yeah. What RICS are looking at the moment is, and there'll be revisions on this later in the year, is they're going to change this to what they call a level 1, level 2, and level 3. Basically, the mortgage valuation is typically a level 1 survey, which is the most basic survey possible. We're not going to be lifting carpets. We might not be going into loft spaces. It's more a visual type report. The home buyers has traditionally been the one that we've recommended to buyers of property. It gives an opinion as to the value of the property and also its condition, and gives a traffic light type response to things that are perfectly fine, things that you'd expect to maintain, and severe issues which would come up as a red on the traffic light type system. And then on a structural, you're finding that is a belt and braces type approach to the construction of the building. It's an intrusive survey. It will take a lot longer. I think you're going to find that there's the number of structural surveys is probably a much smaller amount. And even though there is caution in the market, I think whether or not how prepared surveyors are to actually go and undertake that type of survey in an occupied property at the moment, I'm not sure. That's something we're going to have to wait and see a little bit on, because typically those surveys are going to take quite a while. They're not something that you can do in sort of half an hour or an hour. You're going to be in that property for quite a while. Now that's fine, perhaps if the property's vacant. If the property's occupied, then I'm not sure as yet how we're going to see that develop. But we'll have to wait and see on that. I'm expecting more mortgage activity as the market reopens, definitely. So we're going to be out doing level 1 surveys, and home buyers, which will be now called level 2 surveys, and they're going to be the bread and butter that we're going to be dealing with, as I said.
And how long would that survey take?
So if you were looking at mortgage valuation and you're visiting the premises, I would expect to be on site maybe 45 minutes to an hour, depending on the size of the property. Potentially, if it's a large property, a bit more time. You're going to have to bear that in mind. If it's a studio flat, it will take you less time than a 5-bedroom house. In terms of home buyers, again, the same is going to apply. You're likely to be on site possibly for a couple of hours to do a home buyer's report, a structural survey. It goes on longer, and that again depends on the size of the property and the complexity of it. But it's not uncommon to be on a structural survey for a day, depending on just how complicated it actually is. But we'll have to wait and see.
Okay, lovely. Do you think you'll see more retentions, money held back by lenders on, if certain works need to be done that comes up in any of the reports?
I think that we've seen over the last 12 months retentions, particularly around potential cladding issues on flats, or the refusal to lend completely based on the findings of those type of defective cladding on buildings. So you are going to find retentions, you are going to find refusals to lend completely. So I think at the moment, I don't expect there to be an increased number, but I expect there are problem areas where we are going to see retentions as we have done in the last 12 months.
Okay, so as an estate agent, how do I handle buyers, when they come to me and say, right, I've had my surveyor's report, here's my home buyer's report. It's told me that this is a red, this is a red, this is a red, this is a red. And how can us as estate agents help and add value to buyers and understand the report a lot better?
I think what we are all a bit guilty of at times is if you get a 30-page report, you're probably going to read 5% of it. Or we have people who read the front page and read the conclusion and think that's all of it. I did a property yesterday, for instance, which has been derelict for the last 30 years. And you start going through that with a fine-tooth comb, and you start realising, look, there are issues that you're going to need to address. That property is going into auction, but we're still placing a valuation on it for the client who's going to place a reserve based on that. But you're going to find everything. There are going to be deals out there to be done on properties where developers are going to look at it and say, with works done to it, it can make me a good return. Whereas perhaps as an owner occupier, you might look at it differently. You might look at it and say, well, hold on, if I'm going to have to put a new roof on it immediately, or I need to change the boiler, or I need to do this, this and this, then perhaps that is enough to put someone off buying a property. But that's what the survey is there for. It's usually commissioned by the buyer. And it's a case of, well, if I'm paying £500,000 for this property, are there problems that I'm going to have to deal with day one? And that's what the report's there to identify. It's not there to it's to help you make a more informed decision as to what you're spending your money on. That's ultimately what it's there to do. It does get used as a tool to say, right, well, we had agreed a price of £500,000. Chris has been round and he said the roof needs to be done, this needs to be done, there's damp in here, there's a tree growing out of the drain. All these things
sounds like my house.
Oh, well, yeah. Well, I've come across some right beauties recently.
I can imagine.
But they are things that a buyer's going to need to take on board. If you're not going to, if you've got a tree growing out of the drain, then that can cause issues, and it is something that is going to cost money to get fixed. If the seller is aware of it, then it's something that perhaps they would have had to pay the money for to put right before it went onto the market. So I think it's reasonable for a buyer to say, well, Chris has been round, there is a drain, there's a tree growing out of the drain, that's going to cost me money to fix. You're avoiding paying that money before I buy it, therefore perhaps it should be used as a tool to to cover potential cost. But I do see, the seller's view as well. If I go around there and say, well, the wiring isn't up to current regulations, and the regulations have changed between 3 months ago and now, then I think that carries less weight in terms of a possible reduction.
Okay, thank you. So Abigail, welcome from sunny Wembley, and Stephen, welcome from sunny Edgware. It's nice to see the Edgware mafia is watching. So Stephen says, I recommend independent surveyors that verbally explain to the buyers the report, and then they send them the written report. I think that's far easier for all parties. And would you agree with that?
Yeah, as an independent surveyor, absolutely.
Please send business my way. Okay. Do you think actually that estate agents should have a training session with surveyors to actually go through, you know, what a home buyer or a level 1, level 2, level 3 report looks like? So actually, when they're having conversations with buyers, you know, they know what to say. They, you know, they're prepared. You know, I love to say professionals practice before they play. Roger Federer doesn't turn up on the tennis court and just hit a few tennis balls to win a Grand Slam. He's practicing 6-8 hours a day. You know, if estate agents were sitting down, whether it's solicitors, mortgage brokers, with surveyors, and literally spending, you know, half an hour, going through and thinking, right, these are the things that we need to know and understand and learn, you know, obviously that's going to help and benefit and add value to everybody, I would have thought.
Absolutely. I think collaboration and understanding of what, you know, we're both vital cogs in the process of selling a house. You know, the more fluid and the easier it is for both of us to understand what we're trying to get at and achieve our part of the process, then I think that's got to make it, the whole journey easier for a vendor and a seller and a purchaser. Is the more straightforward the process is, and the better the understanding between the people within it, the smoother the process will be. I think life becomes a lot trickier when sometimes you don't know, you never hear of the mortgage surveyor again. You sort of see them once, they disappear into the ether a little bit and say, oh, that was Bob from, you know, McDowell's or whoever it is. And you're like, well, how do I actually get hold of Bob from McDowell's again? And I think sometimes people get lost in the machine. So you're not able to pick up the phone and say, oh, how did that survey go? You know, can I actually speak to the gentleman who did the actual inspection for me? And you find that that becomes a sort of journey in itself to go back to your lender, to the panel, to the person who actually did the report. Whereas sometimes, you know, picking up the phone and being able to talk to the person who actually created the report would make life easier.
100%. So Abigail says, that sounds like a great idea. Perhaps as agents, we should put this into our training schemes for our junior negotiators so they understand the process, particularly when they've never bought a property themselves. 100%. Stephen says, I think that's a good idea. Abigail, we just need to find the right surveyor to work with. Here's a surveyor for you, Abigail. You can work with Chris. We're not here to sell today. But, you know, I remember going back that there were particular surveyors that used to come into my office that I knew as soon as that surveyor was instructed, I was going to have a down valuation. And then actually I would phone up the broker and say, I'm sorry that I'm not allowing that surveyor into my office. We need a different surveyor, because we knew he couldn't justify, you know, I could reason with him as much as possible. I could give him as many comparables as possible. And, you know, one of the things that was really interesting going back, and this was, I'm going to show my age now, over 20, oh my good God, 27 years ago. So when I first started, I don't think people could sell a property, or I certainly couldn't sell a property. So I remember people who bought properties for 100,000 were struggling to sell them for 60,000. And I remember in Maida Vale, there was a developer called Richard Withy, and he started refurbishing properties, and he got the most unbelievable prices. I mean, unbelievable, you know, because they were done in a really nice way, but there was no comparable evidence out there for surveyors. And I would have 3 or 4 buyers literally trying to buy this property, and I would say to the surveyor, you know, I've got 3 or 4 people. The demand is there. I appreciate I don't have the comparables, and it was incredible. I used to have a surveyors phoning me up the next day saying, "Stephen, you're giving me sleepless nights. You know, I can't justify that." So, a couple of things from that is, can you not have a surveyor who you know particularly that downvalue properties? Can you have that conversation to make sure that they don't come? Is the one question. I found that worked, but as I said, that was 27 years ago. And what about that circumstance where you have, you know, you've got a property where you've got 3 or 4 people that are pushing up the price, you've gone over the asking price and maybe beyond. And again, I remember in one instance, when the market obviously was a lot better, I got £70,000 above the asking price. You know, as a surveyor, what would you do? How would you take that into account?
There are instances like this crop up almost every day. The reason for that is sometimes you're in an area, take East London, for example, where if you picture East London, what you immediately imagine in your head is Victorian terrace housing, and estate after estate after estate of Victorian terrace. And then, for instance, you look at a redevelopment of a particular scheme that sits within that area. So if we take good examples of the Olympic Park, so Stratford, we've had the Olympics. There's been a massive investment into that area, and then the Olympic Village gets converted into residential flats. Some of those flats are retained for rental and don't come onto the market at all. And then the other part of those were originally set out as social housing. So there were about 2,000 social housing flats that went into the Olympic Park almost day one, which was the old athletes village. They tended to be released as shared ownership flats. But of course it was then, well, what are they worth? Because you've got a complete regeneration of an area. We know there's massive inward investment into that area, and there's a sort of phases to development going forward. And initially, day one, it was very difficult to find comparable evidence. You know, you had to look outside that area at what was happening, but there was still, in reality, you could walk off the Olympic Park and be back in Victorian terraced housing within 25 yards. So you had a different thing happening in that particular market. Over time, you find that as that park was developed, that values and those first set of sales have happened. They tended to be mortgage files initially for the shared ownership ones, but because they were shared ownership, you could compare them to the outer market because they were only maybe buying 25-30% shares. So the level of risk to the lenders was very small. What you'll find is that has evolved is that as people staircased up to 100%, and then the properties were then sold at 100% for the first time, it was a virgin market effectively. So we found local estate agents were sort of saying, well, we don't really know, the market's untested. But as people did buy in that, yes, there were initially down valuations because there wasn't that level of confidence in that particular patch. But as the area's developed over the last 8 years now, the level of confidence and number of transactions has changed in that area. So you can, you know, you've got something to hang your hat on in terms of.
Oh, we seem to have lost you there. Oh, you're back again.
Back.
Yeah, you're back. Okay. Yep. And Mrs. Brown's just joined us on the Facebook Live as well. Okay. You're very welcome. Makes it more real, Sam. So also got Gary Marks from Edgeware. So thanks for joining us, Gary. And you obviously knew Richard Withy as well. Rest in peace. Stephen Gilbert again. I find that normally happens when the lender sends out a surveyor who is not familiar to the area where the property is located. Which happens. So a couple of other questions because I'm really grateful for your time, Chris, and I know you got other stuff to do today. So thank you. So Japanese knotweed.
Right. Okay.
se- seems to be a popular occurrence, or been happening a lot more. And there's a lot of talk about will lenders lend
Yeah.
where there's Japanese knotweed? How do you treat it? And what's the best for it? So, your thoughts on Japanese knotweed, please?
Once it's identified on site as a on-site inspection, that it forms part of the survey, it is something that all lenders would expect to be notified about. It's something that we need to be aware of as valuers and surveyors. Its impact on lending is such that it's considered so severe that most lenders will not lend on properties with confirmed cases of Japanese knotweed within the demise of the property. The reason for that is because it's incredibly evasive. It's very difficult to get rid of, and left unkempt, it tends to spread not just within the property but across the boundaries. It has its roots are so deep that it can cause damage to foundations. It can bring down properties if you leave it untreated for a very long period of time. So what tends to happen is if we find that, then the lender will automatically flag it, and it may be that they won't consider it good security for any level of loan. That is not 100% across all of the market, the mortgage market. There are lenders who, within their guidance, will turn around and say, right, it's been identified on survey, go back to the vendor, and if that vendor can provide us with a treatment plan that's undertaken by a specialist firm who deal with this type of problem day in, day out, then they would consider perhaps lending. But that work that's undertaken by the specialised agricultural firm would need to have an insurance-based guarantee placed with it. That gives the lender a little bit more confidence that the treatment being undertaken is the correct one. It will eradicate the problem, and that the insurance that the agriculturist is providing gives them that extra sort of backstop and give them more confidence to deal with it. It is something that is going to cause a problem, and it is something that could cause the collapse of the sale. But there have been some recent case law on this where you found that it's been at a neighbour's property, for instance, and you've got a surveyor's gone out into the back garden and they can see it over the fence in the neighbour's property, but they haven't identified it as a risk to the property that they're actually valuing itself because it's not within the demise. I think that was a little bit it's difficult, but you should be commenting on it. If you've got it in that close proximity, then it's reasonable to assume that it's going to spread across the boundary of the fence, or the roots probably already have. It's just that you can't physically see it. So it may be it's sensible for surveyors, when they see an identified knotweed within the vicinity of the property, to comment upon it on the survey.
Okay, lovely. James says, great interview. How does Chris feel about 30-year-old loft conversions that aren't up to current building regulations but seem safe? Down value or no problem?
I would still there's still going to be an issue in terms of they're not going to be compliant with building regs. If they're being used as a bedroom, then I think it carries a higher degree of risk. If it's up there and you've got your train set up there, and that's it, then it's about level of risk. If it's being used as a habitable room, then I think you need to flag it as an issue. If it's a case where it's just been boarded, it's storage, it's not being used in the same way, perhaps you don't have a vertical, I've seen some incredibly steep, narrow stairs up to these type of things. It's almost better to say, right, it's going to be used as storage, we'll remove the stairs and just put a loft hatch in and get rid of the problem. It doesn't always add value, but sometimes you'll find that the way the loft conversion's been done, you may have found that they've removed some structural support from the original joists and so on that are in there that would have been supporting the roof in the first place. Done badly, it can be a real problem. So 30 years has passed, you might see that the the roof beginning to slump down, and the brickwork beginning to head out at the top of the walls due to spread. So that's things that you would expect to flag on a sort of level on a survey. You do see the good, the bad, and the ugly on this. You know, there's some who just don't bother doing the paperwork, and you see some that are really disasters.
Okay, James, let me know if that answers your question or not. Stephen Gilbert, I'm not sure if you can answer this, but if a buyer who is currently on furlough but his wife is a professional that is working, will he be able to get a mortgage? I think that was more last week where we had MAB on. So if you can't answer it, Chris,
it's all going to come down to income and the level of risk the lender's prepared to take. The number of people who are furloughed in the last 8 weeks, 10 weeks, is going to have an impact, because it does impact on what you expect to receive in terms of your income, and therefore it should be declared to the mortgage provider, and they'll work out on an affordability basis what they're prepared to look at. You know, if your partner's has a high wage, then perhaps they'll look at it in a slightly different way. But I think it's an evolving subject at the moment, but it's one that the lenders are definitely looking at day in, day out at the moment.
Okay, Stephen, if you want, MAB gave me a helpline for last week, so let me know if you want that helpline number, and I will send it to you. And hopefully, Stephen, let me know if that answers your question. Final question.
Yeah.
Unless there's anybody else who wants to ask any questions. Here, James says roof slumping and wall spreading. That's just character.
Unless you're living in it.
Okay, so my client's got an 80-year lease. How do I value that, please?
Okay, what you're going to find is this is typically going to be a flat. Most leasehold properties are flats. There are leasehold houses scattered around the country, but the majority tend to be dealing with leasehold. When you mention leasehold, you're dealing with flats. There is a procedure in place that's laid out that says if you have owned the property for 2 years, you have a right to apply to your freeholder for what they call a statutory lease extension. As soon as you start approaching the 80-year mark, it is better for you to get your lease extended now than wait for that lease to drop below 80 years. The moment it drops below 80 years, even by a day, a minute, or a second, you will find that the cost of your client's lease extension has just gone up. And it won't be a little bit, it will be quite a lot. The key things to look at when you're considering lease extensions and properties with 80-year leases are what ground rent is payable, the value of the property itself at the moment, and the length of lease that's remaining. These are the keys really for you to look at in terms of what your client's going to be expecting to pay. If your vendors owned the flat for in excess of 2 years, what you could do is serve a statutory notice to extend the lease, or what they call a Section 42 notice, and then assign the benefit of that notice onto your buyer. But you need to be careful about it. It's not something, it's better to get your lease and get these things in place before you get too close to this 80-year mark. But it is something that does flag up. You can find that just by a reduction, just by going under the 80-year mark by a day, you could be looking at between a 5-10% reduction in value of the flat. Because anyone who's buying it is then going to be looking at a lease extension and potentially taking on that cost. So it is something to be aware of. I would say that the information on this in the sector has improved dramatically. You have seen a lot more people be aware of the length of their lease when they're looking to buy. So whereas before it hasn't particularly come out on agents' particulars, we mentioned it's a leasehold, or you mentioned it's a share of freehold, but we haven't given specific terms in terms of what the ground rent is, what the lease currently is, when it started, does the ground rent rise, things like this. And I think the awareness of your buyers has definitely picked up, that they're asking these questions. Usually in past sort of 10 years, these would have been questions that have been flagged up by the solicitors as it went through the sale process. I think today, we need to be aware that buyers are much more switched on, and they're looking for this information day one. They don't want to be saddled with, yes, I love the flat, but hold on, oh no, the lease is too short, and then you find out, oh, we're now trying to buy the property and extend the lease at the same time, and that can cause lengthy delays, and it requires a lot of patience and a lot of sort of practical advice to get you through that. So yes, by all means, there is a process there. But if you've just sold a flat and the buyer hasn't assigned a benefit, served a notice, then with that 80-year mark in place, it could be sold by the vendor with 80 years, and then that buyer would have to wait 2 years before they would be able to do an extension. So their lease would already be at 78 years before they'd have the entitlement for a statutory extension. So it's something that people need to be aware of. There is lots of advice out there, but it's something that has become more and more prominent. And we're finding that we're doing lease extensions on properties with perhaps 90 plus years left to run. Yeah. So you're finding that people are much more aware of it now. So we're doing extensions much earlier in the process than we would have done traditionally.
And you've got an automatic right to extend it by a further 90 years.
Once they've owned it for 2 years, it's 90 years on top of the existing term of the lease, and the ground rent would drop away to zero, or peppercorn as they call it.
Okay, fantastic. Well, Gary says £3 land registry check at the start prior to marketing essential to get the lease information. To help you. So money well spent. So Chris,
I think it would be to go one step beyond that, actually seeing the lease, because sometimes the title will give you the start date of the lease and the term, but it'll give you a start of the ground rent and the end of the ground rent sometimes, but pulling off the lease will actually tell you how often that ground rent increases. So you might find that there's been a lot of talk of 10-year doubling ground rent. So what you might find in the title is, the ground rent's £200 day one, but it might not tell you that your ground rent doubles every 10 years. So that can really increase the cost of a potential extension in the future. So do take one step beyond that, and if you can, get hold of the lease and check those terms.
Fantastic. Chris, really grateful for your time. So thank you. So thanks so much. You've added loads and loads of value. You've given loads of great top tips and some insights. Really appreciate it. So if people do want to get hold of you, what's the best way, please? Especially that Abigail Gray.
The best way of doing it is through the firm's website, which is www.mcdowells.com. McDowell spelled with an A rather than an E. Otherwise, you get some. I think they do rainwater gutters and things like that. So don't go there. Go to McDowell's with an A, and we should be able to help. So it's mcdowells.com. All right. Thanks very much.
Fantastic. Thank you all for joining us again for Lunchtime Learning and for enjoying us this week. Really appreciate it. Next week on Tuesday, got Mike Day, who's going to be talking compliance and money laundering. So a really sexy subject there. I've also just started a YouTube page. There's one video on there so far. So please go to Stephen J. Brown Consultancy on YouTube and subscribe to it. There'll be many more videos on it. Please like this, please share it, please get it out to all your colleagues as well. And for everybody back at work, if you're watching this after, I hope you're having productive times at work. Stay safe, stay alert. Thanks very much for all your comments. So Ruth, thanks for today. It's been very interesting. Steve Gilbert, thank you. Take care and stay safe. Chris Stevens, thank you. All the best and have a good afternoon. Andrea, thank you. James Brill, Kate Whitscombe, thanks for joining us. Thank you. Kimberly Donahue-Smith, thanks so much. Vicky, thank you. I thought you were exceptional yesterday on the ICG one. So nice for you to watch us. So thanks very much. Gary, thank you. Rick, thanks very much. So have a productive day. Please like it, share it, tag your colleagues in that will benefit from it, and have a productive Thursday afternoon, and look forward to seeing you on Tuesday. Or if you want to see me again, I'm being ask questions and answers at 3:30 on the Kerfuffle podcast or Kerfuffle platform. So hopefully see you there. Thanks a lot. Have a good day, everybody. Bye. Thank you, Chris.
Bye.